All right, is everybody at chapter 16? Okay, we're going to start. Now, I do want to remind you that there's actually 3 rounds of events that take place in the book of Job, and we just got through round 1. We're now starting in chapter 15, round 2. Now, I believe there are 42 chapters in the book of Job, and I know that we're going slow. And I know that some of you, every time I say, oh yeah, we're going to do this in Job, roll your eyes, because it seems like it's a broken record. Really what happens in each one of these, Job's teaching us a slightly different story. He's also teaching us things that we come to know about God. The neat thing about the book of Job is it was written within 700 years of the flood. So when you look, you go from Adam to Noah and then from Noah to Job. The distance isn't that far. It's kind of like still living in, the 5th century of and having Jesus. We're not looking back 2,000 years when we're in the book of Job. We're only looking back maybe 700 years. It could be even earlier than that. So it gives us some insight. And you have to understand, too, that Job is a Gentile. He's not Jewish. He comes from a different lineage. So that means that he's not a son of Abraham. That's unusual in the fact that this is an Old Testament book to the Jewish people. But the thing is that God has been seeking both Jew and Gentile. And the amazing part is that in Christ, there's only one. There's neither Jew or Gentile anymore. There is just one, his church. And that's an amazing thing. All right, so Job chapter 16, it says, Then Job answered and said, I have heard many such things. Miserable comforters are you all. Shall words of wind have an end? Or what provokes you that you answer? I also could speak as you do. If your soul were in my soul's place, I could heap up words against you and shake my head at you. But I would strengthen you with my mouth, and the comfort of my lips would relieve your grief. Though I speak, my grief is not relieved. And if I remain silent, how am I eased? But now he has worn me out. You have made desolation all my company. You have shriveled me up, and it is a witness against me. My leanness rises up against me and bears witness to my face. He tears me in his wrath and hates me. He gnashes at me with his teeth. My adversary sharpens his gaze upon me. They gape at me with their mouths. They strike me reproachfully on the cheek. They gather against me. God has delivered me to the ungodly and turned me over to the hands of the wicked. I was at ease, but he has shattered me. He has also taken my neck and shaken me to pieces. He has set me up for his target. His archers surround me. He pierces my heart and does not pity. He pours out my gall on the ground. He breaks me with wound upon wound. He runs at me like a warrior. I have sewn sackcloth over my skin and laid my head in the dust. My face is flushed with weeping, or from weeping, and on my eyelids is the shadow of death. Although no violence is in my hand, and my prayer is pure. O earth, do not cover my blood, and let my cry have no resting place. Surely even now my witness is in heaven, and my evidence is on high. My friends scorn me. My eyes pour out tears to God. Oh, that one might plead for a man with God, as a man pleads for his neighbor. For when a few years are finished, I shall go the way of no return. Now, you guys understand Job's position. We've been down this. He says, he's not saying that he's without sin. He says that the punishment doesn't fit the crime. But he's having serious issues with his friends, right? They keep coming in, and yeah, they're speaking the common truths. I mean, who can argue that the sky is blue? But when you say that the sky is blue, how does that encourage somebody who is hurting? It really doesn't. It doesn't apply to their particular way of doing things. Their position, though, and we see this so commonly, is that, well, we must have God's favor because we're rich, because we have elevated ourselves to a higher authority. And isn't that exactly what the Pharisees were doing during the time of Jesus? They felt that their righteousness was higher than the people's righteousness because they were Pharisees, because they were members of the Sanhedrin. They didn't see the people as being equal. Jesus came in and told a totally different story from them. He said, it's all equal. Everything is level at the foot of the cross. Now, the last couple of chapters have shown us that Job, he's human after all. He's just like me. It's kind of funny in the fact that on the one hand, he places his trust in God. He's crying out for a mediator. He even says that even if God kills me, I'm still going to trust in him. But then on the other hand, with his mind, he's going, but if I could get before God, I'm going to give him a what for. I'm going to tell him. And then he does that thing that, well, we've done it as kids, right? If you'll do this, I'll do that. If you do these things, God, you can be my God. Is Job's salvation, is his righteousness ever in question? No, it's not. Okay? But what we do see him doing is sinning. The issue where it comes from is his lack of humility in how he presents himself before God. Now, the one thing that Job does, and you all have friends that are like this, is that since God orchestrates everything, since God knows everything, God then has to allow bad things to happen. It must be God who brings sorrow and angst to man's life. In fact, Job just gets to the point where he goes, God, if you can't be nice to us, just leave us alone. Can you imagine having a relationship with God where you're really high up here and then all of a sudden this happens? And it just shows us how broken he must be. Because everything that he's going through right now is questioning his relationship with God. He was the most blessed on the earth. He was righteous before God. He didn't do anything wrong. And God has put together and allowed Satan to come in and orchestrate the events. But it was Satan who brought the accusation against both God and Job, right? Satan came in and said, hey, have you considered Job? You're giving him special favor. God said, okay, do what you want with him, but don't take his health. Don't kill him. So he loses his family, loses his material wealth. Then Satan, and Job doesn't break. He goes, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord, right? Immediately upon hearing that, Satan beelines straight for the throne room again. Comes in and charges God again. Well, you're not being fair, God. You're not letting me get to him in a way that it's actually going to work. God says, okay, do it, but don't kill him, but you can take away his health. And again, same thing. Satan immediately goes down. We find Job sitting in an ash heap with boils all over and just completely taken to pieces. But think about this. Would God have allowed Job to go through these things without knowing what the end result was going to be? God has a lot of faith in Job because we're reading about it now. It's been put into our Bible so that we can understand certain things. Not only that, but it's also proving something to Satan. Satan's coming in and saying, you know what? Mankind as a whole only loves you because you bless them. God's going, Satan, you've missed it. They love me because I'm me. I've programmed them from birth to come looking for me. They don't need the blessings, and I'll show you how this actually happens. So Satan is allowed to do it. But it was Satan that brought the charges, not God. But God knew all along that these things were going to happen. We struggle with that sometimes. The thing is, though, is life happens. Just because God doesn't prevent something from happening, meaning that he knows it's coming up and allows it, doesn't mean that he's got a target out for us. Now, Do we get in trouble from time to time with sin? Of course. Okay, I'll be the first to admit that many times when I get hit by the 2x4, I had it coming a long time before. But we do struggle with that idea and the concept. If God is an all-knowing, all-loving God, why does he allow these things to happen? We live in a fallen world, folks. When we were born, it begins the decay. When we're in our 20s, we don't feel that way. When we get to our 40s, we start thinking about it. When we get to our 50s, everybody starts telling me about it. And when we get to our 70s and 80s, folks start going, I can't wait to get out of this body and get my new tent. You know, they're like, oh, I'm so glad that this is almost over. Now, last week, Eliphaz started round 2 of this accusation match that's taking place. He starts with Job saying that you're a sinning windbag full of empty words. It's a personal attack. It's there to put Job on the defensive and for Eliphaz to, remember, this is a crowd gathered around, so it allows him to look better than before. And then he tells Job, you're on shaky ground. But then comes the challenge. Remember what Eliphaz says? He basically says, do you really think you know God? If you're going through all of this, do you really know God? Do you think you know God better than we do? Do you think you are wiser than the 3 of us? Consider our combined ages and experience. Job, you really can't bring anything against us. It's their position of being haughty and loftier. He then asked Job, isn't it consolation enough that God just let you live? Remember, God just took out your children. So you survived. You got through it. God showed you grace. So why are you mad at God? How many of you guys have suffered some severe losses in your life? Doesn't it hurt? Isn't one of the last things you want to do is praise God when those things happen? It does. It's that way. That's our flesh. That is our nature. Even worse, can you imagine your friend coming up and going, why are you mad at God? Or why are you disappointed? Or why are you angry? It's no big deal. Wait a second. I just lost somebody that's very close to me. It is a big deal. And then the last half of chapter 15 was, again, back to that idea of karmic justice. If you do well or do good, you're going to get good. And if you do evil, you're going to get evil. But is that how the world really works? Not even close. You know, his friends, believing in this idea of karmic justice, keep coming up to him and saying, Job, you're suffering because you did something bad. Just confess your sin. It's no big deal. Really what they want to do is stand in judgment of Job. But the truth is Job didn't do anything wrong. So in verse 1 of chapter 16, it starts off, then Job answered and said, I have heard many such things. Miserable comforters are you all. So right out of the chute, in reply to Eliphaz's charges, he goes, you guys are miserable. Not only that, but I've heard all of this before. I love how he says this. Miserable comforters are you. Because he's hitting the nail on the head. When his friends came, what was their initial purpose? It was to mourn with Job, to provide comfort, right? Job chapter 2, verses 11 and 12 say, now when Job's 3 friends heard all of this adversity that had come upon him, each one came from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. For they had, am I on the right page? Okay. For they had made an appointment together to come and mourn with him, and to comfort him. Verse 12, and when they raised their eyes from afar and did not recognize him, they lifted their voices and wept, and each one tore his robe and sprinkled dust on his head towards heaven. They saw his condition and they went, whoa. Right? They felt sorry. Then they sat with him for 7 days during the mourning period. It's the best thing that they could do, but after 7 days, they're like, Job, you really messed up. And Job's like, what do you mean? See, this was supposed to be a mission of mercy, but it has turned into a character assassination. Job in chapter 13, verse 4 says to him, "But you forgers of lies, you are all worthless physicians." They came to try to help him heal, and what are they doing? They're only making the wounds deeper, aren't they? All right? And we're going to see that it continues on and on. For those of you that do roll your eyes, you're going to see the same thing in chapter 21, where it says, "How then can you comfort me with empty words, since falsehoods remain in your answer?" How many of you have ever had friends like this, by the way? I think most of us have had it one time or another. What's that?
On and off.
On and off, exactly. All right, so verse 3, it says, "Shall words of wind have an end? Or what provokes you to that answer?" You're calling me a windbag, Eliphaz. Hey, I shut up. Your wind has no end. And you should be ashamed of how you are speaking. He's really saying, you are vain. Your words are empty, and you're not helping me. But Job's hackles are up, right? I mean, he's been charged time and time again by his three friends. And the truth of the matter is Job could say let me ask you this. Is Job doing some things wrong at some times? Of course he is, all right? He's crying out and doing all the other stuff. But Job could sit there and go, well, they started it from God's point of view. Think about it. But have you ever watched children when they fight? Well, you're a stupid head. No, you're a stupid head. Well, my dad could beat up your dad. No, my dad will beat up your dad. Well, my mom will beat up your dad. And it just gets worse and worse, right? Same thing is happening here to some extent. But the thing is that God's the one that is keeping score. Now, let me ask you, is it okay to rebuke somebody if they bring a falsehood against you? Of course it is. As a matter of fact, in Leviticus 19, verse 17, it says, "You shall not hate your brother in your heart. You shall surely rebuke your neighbor and not bear sin because of him." So to not do it is actually more sinful than to go and do the rebuke. But the thing is that it's how we rebuke. To say somebody's a stupid head doesn't solve any problems. Where do we have to come from? We have to come from the position of love. We have to come from the position that the Bible takes. One of the things that we see Job's friends doing is they're coming from a position of themselves being the center of wisdom rather than letting God be the center of the wisdom. In Matthew, a prime example of this is Jesus being tempted in the wilderness. In Matthew chapter 4, you guys know the story. It says, "Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, afterward he was hungry. Now when the tempter came to him, he said," next one, right? "Now when the tempter came to him, he said, 'If you are the Son of God, command that these stones become bread.' But he answered," Jesus saying, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God." Then in verse 5 it says, "Then the devil took him up into the holy city, set him on the pinnacle of the temple, and said to him, 'If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, He shall give his angels charge over you, and in their hands they shall bear you up, lest you dash your foot against a stone.' Jesus said to him, 'It is written again, you shall not tempt the Lord your God.'" And then in verse 8, it says, "And again devil took him up on an exceedingly high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory, and said to him, 'All these things I will give you if you will just fall down and worship me.' Then Jesus said, 'Away with you, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve.' Then the devil left him, and behold, the angels came and ministered him." Now, did Satan bring unfounded charges against Jesus? Yeah, actually he did. Jesus says that he's the Messiah, right? He says, "Before Abraham was, I am." But Satan, in the first two examples, comes in and says, "If you're the Son of God." Right? Now, if you're the Son of God, do this. to prove that you're the Son of God. Do it so that you can prove to me that you truly are Messiah, because God's not going to let you get hurt. He's not going to let you stumble. He's not going to let these things happen. Where does Jesus come from, though? Jesus in his humanity puts God between him and Satan in the same way that Michael did when they fought over the body of Moses that we find in the book of Jude. It's the idea of let God be the one doing the fighting. You don't have to. When you rebuke, use God's words in order to be able to do the rebuke. Don't come from your center, because, folks, the best we can come out with is, hey, you're a stupid head. Okay? But when God does it, it's so much more eloquent and right to the point. It really is. In verse 4, it says, I also could speak as you do. If your soul was in my soul's place, I could heap up words against you and shake my head at you. But I would strengthen you with my mouth, and the comfort of my lips would relieve your grief. I would treat you better than you're treating me. If the circumstances were reversed, I'm not going to do what you did to me. I'm going to come to you and try to strengthen you rather than accuse you. This is so common that truth is that Paul actually has to address it in the church of Galatia. In Galatians chapter 6, 1 through 3, it says, Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. Now, his friends have come in and they're falsely accusing, and they're coming from a position of righteousness, are they not? Paul's saying that as Christian brothers and sisters, even if you think somebody has stumbled and fallen, you need to come from the position of level ground. You can't come in saying, I am more righteous than you are. In fact, Paul takes it one more step. He says, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. For if anyone thinks himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. In fact, Jesus is saying, don't even come on level ground. Come in underneath. Be that doulos. Be that bondservant. We don't have to come in and be confrontational. We can let God do the fighting for us. Job's so-called friends, though, they have the opposite position. I'm wealthy. I'm not enduring trials. I have found favor with God, which elevates me to a position above you. I can look down upon you. I'm more righteous than you are, and therefore I can sit in judgment. Folks, the only one that can sit in judgment is God. Now, we can be fruit inspectors, but when it comes to salvation, when it comes to the reasons for doing stuff, that's between them and God, not between you and them or me and them. Truth of the matter is given the circumstances, I think Job's actually doing pretty well. I mean, I'd probably pick up a baseball bat about this time. I'd be like, I just want peace. I'm just going to clear the area. Go away. I'm done. Can't help but think of Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. I think you guys remember the story. It says in Daniel chapter 4, verses 28, it says, all this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. He was in his palace. He was looking out over all of Babylon. And at the end of 12 months, he was walking about the royal palace of Babylon. The king spoke, saying, is not this great Babylon, here's the key words, that I have built for a royal dwelling by my mighty power and for the honor of my majesty. You guys remember when he said that? You guys have seen the movie, I'm sure. We've shown it twice. But the thing is that while still in the king's mouth, a voice fell from heaven, said, King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom has departed from you. Whoa. And they shall drive you from men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make you eat grass like oxen, and 7 times shall pass over you, until you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he chooses. And then in verse 33, at that very hour the word was fulfilled concerning Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from men and ate grass like an ox. His body was wet with the dew of heaven till his hair had grown like eagle's feathers and his nails like bird's claws. He had to be humbled. But you know what? I find myself so often taking that same position that King Nebuchadnezzar. I did this. No, God did this. I'm his instrument. His friends keep starting from the position of I. And when we come from that position, it causes us to forget that we have fallen short too. We've disappointed God on many occasions. And when we start from ourselves, we take credit for God's work. Now, regardless of what Job has done or not done, his friends are not showing him any grace and mercy. Now, in verses 2 through 5, Job's complaint is about the company that's around him, specifically his 3 friends. As we move into verses 6 through 14, although he's still addressing Eliphaz, his charge now changes to being against God. He's trying to be sneaky, as it were. Have you ever talked to somebody and you said it really loud because you wanted somebody else to hear it, but you didn't want to say it to them directly? That's kind of what's happening here. So in verse 6, he starts, though I speak, my grief is not relieved, and if I remain silent, how am I eased? No matter what I do, my grief does not go away. No matter what is happening, I can't find any rest from my hurt. And folks, when people suffer loss, that is one of the huge things. They just go around numb. Those first few days, they just go through the motions. If they have family around to help them, that's encouraging. But sometimes they want to be alone too. Job's in that very same position. But now he finds himself not being comforted, but fighting the accusations of his friends. In verse 7, it says, now he, the he is God, has worn me out. And then the you is also pointing to God. You have made desolate all my company. I actually like the way the Amplified Bible puts this. It says, but now God has taken away my strength. You, O Lord, have made desolate all my family and associates. You're the one that has taken it all away. So where's the blame lying once again? Where's the finger pointing? The other thing that's going to happen is in verse 8, it says, he continues on with this lament. He says, you have shriveled me up, and it is a witness against me. My leanness rises up against me and bears witness to my face. So he charges God. He's pointing the finger at God, and then he says, what you, God, are doing to me is causing me to lose my witness before the people. It's causing them to do what is happening right now, which is they are falsely accusing me. If I found your favor in contrast, I should be doing all of this other stuff. I should be rich. I should have my family. I should have my possessions. So he's buying into the idea a little bit of karma. If I do good, I'll get good. In the blessing of me with riches, in the blessing of me with all of the things that you gave me, God, your name was being glorified. But now that this is happening, your name's no longer being glorified. God's position doesn't change. What Job's doing is saying that when things are good, I'll give you credit, Lord, but when they're bad, I'm going to blame you. In verse 9, it says, he tears me in his wrath and hates me. He gnashes at me with his teeth. My adversary sharpens his gaze upon me. Now, this verse is really telling about how Job actually sees things right now. He feels that he's found himself in the crosshairs of God, specifically God's wrath. And he thinks about it because God hates him. Do you guys ever feel that way? Have you ever felt that way? Wondering, God, do you really hate me? I think we all do at some point or another. We're all going through something that hits us pretty hard. But Job's misapplying this. He's saying, you do this because you hate me. And then he continues on to say, he gnashes at me with his teeth. He's comparing God to a lion devouring its prey. And then he says, my adversary sharpens his gaze on me. Lord, you're doing this to me, and all it's doing is letting Satan come in and have a shot at me. The problem is it's been Satan that's been taking the shots all along. But Job's got his things confused. In verse 10, he says, they gape at me with their mouth. They strike me reproachfully on the cheek. They gather together against me. God has delivered me to the ungodly and turned me over to the hands of the wicked. Now, the they in this verse is speaking of Job's so-called friends and the people who have gathered around to watch the fight. And they are looking upon Job with this kind of, this is Job? This is once God's most blessed? The funny thing is that when people see that, they go, well, I don't want any part of God if that's the way he is. And Job's feeding right into this argument. He's not coming out and saying, I'm still blessed. He's not coming out saying, I still glorify God. He's not coming out doing all of the things that he should be doing. He's buying into the despair. He's buying into that very idea that I was once the blessed, now God hates me. God doesn't turn back and forth like that. He's not human. God's the very definition of love. But then he calls them ungodly because he sees himself in this contrast. At his heart, at his core, he still knows that God is his center. There is still a part of him that is clinging to the holiness of God. When he cries out, he's crying out both in accusation but also in hope. The idea that I'll be restored. The idea that God's going to change things. And that's because his heart still believes. His heart still knows. His friends, on the other hand, he calls them ungodly. Why? Because they're starting with themselves. Now in verse 12 he says, I was at ease, but he has shattered me. He has also taken me by my neck and shaken me to pieces. He has set me up for his target. His archers surround me. He pierces my heart and does not pity. He pours out my gall on the ground. He breaks me with wound upon wound. He runs at me like a warrior. Job's saying, before God got involved, I was happy. I was at ease. However, since God has taken issue with me, I am utterly destroyed. I have become an archer's pincushion and a warrior's piñata. I mean, that's kind of how he's feeling about all of this. Then in verse 15, he's coming back to the things that he has done. He says, I have sewn sackcloth over my skin and laid my head in the dust. My face is flushed from weeping, and on my eyelids is the shadow of death. Although no violence is in my hand, and my prayer is pure. Folks, I'm suffering. Just look at me. I have nothing left to give. God has taken everything from me. He's taken my pride. He's taken my dignity. He has taken my family, my wealth, and he has taken my health. It's all gone. I have nothing left. He's at that end of that rope. The knot has been tied 3 or 4 times, and he's still barely clinging on. He knows he hasn't done anything worthy of such punishment, saying, I didn't commit any violence. I have clung to God. I've clung to his promises. And in an indirect way, he's saying, everything's been taken away from me. If I had sinned, I would confess it. There is nothing stopping me. I have lost all thread of credibility. I have lost all thread of dignity. There's nothing left. I would have confessed it already. In verse 18, he cries out, O earth, do not cover my blood, and let my cry have no resting place, knowing that he hasn't done these things. He's crying out, because during the time that Job lived, and we can always go back to the Cain and Abel incidents, the idea was believed that if innocent blood was shed, that blood would cry out to God for vengeance upon the one who spilled it. Do you guys remember back in Genesis where Cain kills Abel? And then it says, your brother's blood cries out to me? That's what Job's alluding to. And the idea was, as long as the blood was staining the ground and not covered up, it would still cry out for vengeance. And so that's what Job is saying. I want vengeance. When I'm dead and gone, God, I want you to get these guys. He also says, and let my cry have no resting place, being, I want it to echo. I want it to fill heaven and earth after I am gone. Because again, I want God to get these guys. I want vengeance. They've done wrong. In verse 19, he says, surely now my witness is in heaven and my evidence is on high. To those who are around Job, they're misreading the situation. However, I want you to understand something. God keeps track. Every thought, every word, everything that we do is written down in God's books. Revelation chapter 20, verses 11 and 12 tell us of the great white throne judgment. It says that, then I saw the great white throne and him who sat on it, from whose face of the earth and heavens fled away. And there was found no place for them. In verse 12 it says, and I saw dead, small and great, standing before God, and books were open. Notice it's books, and then there's a contrast. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged according to their works by the things which were written in the books, plural. Rest assured, God does not miss a single thing. It's all written down just to make sure that it's recorded. I have a video to show you. You guys might like this.
Oh, I know quite a lot about you, Bruce.
Let me start over again and turn it up a little bit.
Oh, I know quite a lot about you, Bruce. Just about everything there is to know. Everything you've ever said or done or thought about doing, right there in that file cabinet.
Wow, a whole drawer just for me. Mind if I take a look?
Sure like.
This ought to be good.
Now, this last entry was a little disturbing.
But it's true, isn't it? You know, the one thing that I have to say, though, is I am so glad that within those books, right, that all my bad deeds, they've been blotted out by the blood of the Lamb. The only thing that gets remembered for those that are in Christ is the good stuff. When you're in that book of life, in Revelation chapter 22, or I'm sorry, in Revelation chapter 20, if you open the books and look, you're not going to find a single condemnation against you. Not one single sin will be there. Because over the black writing will be a red stripe. And that red stripe is the blood of God, or is the blood of the Lamb. It's Jesus' blood that was shed on the cross. And folks, it'll look really nice, not like the whiteout stuff that I do. It'll be perfect. And when God reads it, all of that goes away. We don't have to stand at the white throne judgment because of it. But I can bet we all know people that will. In verse 20, it says, "My friends scorn me, and my eyes pour out tears to God. In my suffering, the tears are coming from my face." In verse 21, "Oh, that one might plead for a man with God as a man pleads for his neighbors." What is he after? He wants a mediator. He wants the Messiah. This is where we see a lack of understanding on Job's part. He knows God. He's made all of his sacrifices that he's supposed to do. He's going through all of the motions. But the one thing he's unsure about is the Messiah. He's unsure if the Messiah even exists, let alone will come. And so he cries out for one. He doesn't think he's there. And yet, we have that whole assurance. We know that we have a Messiah. We know that our advocate sits at the right hand of God, makes intercession for us day after day. And that's exactly what Job is crying out for. I want somebody to stand up for me as a neighbor would, as a witness in the court, that I'm not this person. The thing is that we actually are that person, but the penalty's already been paid. And then he closes in verse 22. He says, "When a few years are finished, I shall go the way of no return." He knows that what's going to happen is going to happen, and in a couple of years, he's going to be gone. What he's worried about is his legacy. What he's worried about is, God, don't let this be what everybody thinks of me, remembers of me. I want to be more than that. Now, I want you to realize that since God has allowed, in a sense, sometimes he has to give permission to Satan to do certain things. Do you guys remember Peter? He's going, "I'm not going to," or "I won't obey," And Jesus looks at him and says, "Peter, Satan's been asking to sift you like flour," right? Jesus is saying, I'm the one that has kept him away. Can you imagine what life would be like without Jesus? Without that mediator there? Without God in a whole? Job's taking Psalm 37:23, the first part. He says, "The steps of a good man are ordered of the Lord, and he delights in his way." But it takes it out of context. The idea being that the steps of a man are ordered from the Lord. Therefore, my fate, as it were, is all in God's hands. I can't take a single step that he doesn't order. But he forgets verse 24, where it says, "Though he fall, he shall not be utterly downcast, for the Lord upholds him with his hand." Who caused the falling? We do, right? God's there to catch us. He's the one that upholds us when we stumble. I want to talk about this just for a brief minute, which is, although God knows everything, doesn't mean that he acts on everything. We have to experience life. We live in a fallen world. We are sinful creatures. God didn't cause it. We caused it. We can't blame God for the bad things that happen to us. In fact, I would imagine that probably, more than 50%, let's go maybe 75 or 80, I did myself. I've made poor choices. I did stupid things in my youth. I still get up out of bed in the morning and go, ow, my knee. And then I think back to, I kind of did that tackle wrong. I played football. I did that. God didn't do it. I was having fun at the time, as a matter of fact. If I could relive my youth, it would be wonderful. But I can't. But what this does is it causes me to look forward to meeting our Lord. It causes me not to put so much faith and wonderfulness in this life, because what awaits me is so much greater. We have all asked God the question why. We've all fallen short and accused God of doing evil. But I don't want you to ever forget that you're God's beloved child. Think about this. He gave his son for you. God, came down, poured himself into a man. Came down to lead by example. Came down to be the Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world. He suffered torture and ridicule, put himself on that cross, but it was me and my sin that nailed him there. Now, is that a God that hates us, or is that a God that loves us? You see, God does want the best for you, and the best for you is with him. The best for you is staying within the bumpers that he has established. But what we think is best for us and what God thinks is best for us is oftentimes do different things. You know, there's a song called Unanswered Prayers. Yeah, that happens. How many of you have met an old girlfriend or boyfriend and you go, I am so glad that, no, that prayer wasn't answered. It happens, right? But the thing is that that's where our faith and trust must come in. Because we can't see forward, we can only look back. But God wants to use us for his kingdom, for the glory of his kingdom. And he pours out blessings upon you like you cannot imagine. Let me ask you a quick question. Did God bless you yesterday? Yes or no? Show of hands. Okay. Now, did he bless you today? A lot of us got out of bed, right? Okay. What makes you think he's not going to bless you tomorrow? What makes you think that overnight everything's going to change? Even when everything in our lives change, what makes you think God's position towards you is going to change? You know, God is righteous, and yes, it's his nature to punish sin. But he is the very definition of love, of mercy, of grace, of peace, and of comfort. When you're struggling, come to the Lord. Don't run. And I'm going to leave you with this. Jesus says, cast your cares upon me. Cast your burdens upon me, because I, Jesus, will give you rest. Isn't it a wonderful place to be? Let's pray.